radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Well, hello there, and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde, and I took a couple of days off last week, so I feel like I missed out on some of the action, but it's wonderful to be back in the saddle and here calling out and applying some accountability to Idaho's corporate media. And we've got a lot to work with today. Our theme today is money is no object, by which we mean as long as it's the taxpayers that are footing the bill, hey, we can afford whatever we want. And I'm going to give you a couple examples of this. Most notable, we're going to be talking about some of the school levies and some of the bonds that went before people throughout the state. This was a big deal, and the way that the media portrayed this, you would think that they were acting more as a public relations firm and less as an impartial reporter of facts to the taxpayers, whose money is going to be used. Nonetheless, I want to start with something that should bring peace to your troubled heart, and that is that after spending hundreds of thousands of dollars of taxpayer money, a Washington, D.C. firm that started investigating back in November after a former Boise Police captain shared what some termed racist and discriminatory views, this firm has now found no evidence of widespread racism within the Boise Police Department. Now, I don't know if that was keeping you awake at night, but obviously for some people it was a big deal. During Tuesday's work session, Steptoe and Johnson attorney Michael Bromwich said the Washington, D.C. firm found no evidence of widespread racism within the Boise Police Department. Now, the city of Boise hired the firm back in November after realizing now former Captain Matthew Bringleson held what they call racist and white supremacist views. The city initially approved $500,000 for the investigation. It went a little bit beyond that, though, and so they also report that city council members ended up approving another $150,000 during Tuesday's city council meeting. But a city spokesman said that money is going toward the work the firm has already completed. Now, the firm primarily investigated whether Bringleson's racist beliefs infected the rest of the police department. During his presentation, Bromwich said many police department employees were surprised to find out about Bringleson's beliefs. Really, do you think so? Like he wasn't walking around in a KKK hood or burning crosses everywhere he went? Interesting. After interviewing 18 current and former department members, he said most people did not experience or see evidence of racism or white supremacy within the department, although they had experienced racism at the hands of residents in Boise. Now, look, there are people who hold racial or racist attitudes, and they can be found in many different places. In fact, what should be obvious to all is that the people who are obsessed with race, and that includes a lot of people of different colors, they are often the source of racism. Why? Because they see everybody through the lens of, well, what color's your skin? What's your group identity? And just to make it clear, identity politics and racism, they are peas in a pod. They are both examples of very ugly forms of collectivism. And people can hold discriminatory attitudes or even improper ideas, or they can hold unpopular ideas and not be guilty of being racist. The term has lost so much meaning because, frankly, you have people today who are calling everything in sight racist. I mean, for crying out loud, Tucker Carlson, after he was let go by Fox, something came out where it was a behind-the-scenes commentary. Tucker Carlson was talking about observing a fight in which three white guys ganged up on somebody and were beating the stuffing out of an Antifa member. And Tucker said, there was a part of me that actually at first was kind of like, good, this guy's getting what he deserves. But he says, then I realized, you know what? This is putting me on the same level as the Antifa activists who love to embrace violence when it suits their purposes. And he says, besides, white guys don't fight like that. They don't gang up on people like that, which press members took as, well, see, there's evidence of his racism. Really, based on what? Well, because he said white guys don't fight like this. Look, he offered an opinion. And that doesn't mean you have to agree. And just because he noticed that typically, when you see, white individuals getting into a fight, you typically don't see them jump into, a gang type situation unless, they're part of an actual gang. But you do see it sometimes in other communities. So he wasn't, in no way was he putting other people down. He was actually, I think, making an observation that anybody else could have made. But by assigning it racism, by gosh, there's more evidence. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. I mean, I wondered a long time ago when I used to hear about, the John Birchers thinks there's a communist behind every bush and hiding under every rock. And you thought, wow, it must be tiring to have to spend all your time looking, for the latest threat or looking for, somebody who's out there to get you. I feel that same way towards the people who are crying racism the loudest these days. It must be very tiring to see racism in everything, to see every possible example of human interaction through the lens of, well, how does this stack up on, in terms of identity politics, and what group are you from and what group aren't you from? And are you an oppressor? Are you the oppressed? Grow up, please. But in the meantime, the city of Boise is like, but we'll spend over $500,000 and maybe a little extra to assure you that we can't find any racism within our police department. Now, look, again, I'm not encouraging people to hold attitudes that denigrate other people or that judge other people based on their skin color. That should be clear. And if you're hearing, well, it sounds to me like this is just racist, whatever you're saying, I'm going to have to suggest the problem is likely you, not me. But the biggest problem here is nobody really seems to have a clear definition. Well, what exactly? How would they know if they encountered racism, among the Boise Police Department? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question, but I don't know that it's a very subjective sort of thing to be going after. And maybe it's for the sake of just we're trying to punish improper attitudes. More often than not, when someone is accused of racism, it's less a matter of, well, we know that they hold hateful attitudes. It's more a matter of, well, we know who doesn't care for whatever it is that they believe. So take it with a grain of salt. If you're out there flinging accusations of racism with abandon, maybe consider defining your terms if you want to be taken seriously. Otherwise, it's just, another bogus predicate. It sounds bad. We assume that it's bad. But if you haven't really shown what exactly it is, you haven't really done your homework either. But again, that's no concern for the taxpayers up there in Boise, because their money is being used to fund an effort to find something that may indicate bad attitudes. All right, I'll step off that soapbox here for a moment, and let's talk about these school levies, which were voted on yesterday. Now, I know in some parts of the state, there were levies and bond issues that passed. The big one that had everybody's attention, though, was in West Ada, which is the state's biggest school district, and they were proposing, I believe it was a $500 million bond levy to do maintenance and construction and basically take care of existing buildings and try to keep up with the growing number of students. So while that's laudable and there's been an immense amount of growth, I don't doubt that there are some very real needs. What troubles me is the way that the media went about reporting on this. I'm going to start with just a couple of headlines. Here we have from the Idaho Statesman, cost of growth. West Ada asks voters to pass record levy to handle school overcrowding. If you read the story, though, really it just goes into, there is no counterpoint. The assumption is, well, of course they need the money, and by gosh, you better vote. In fact, here's a link to the West Ada School District website telling you how you should vote on this issue. IdahoNews.com, same kind of thing. West Ada's district levy would renovate and construct new facilities. You read the story, though, and you find that it's like a press release from the school district. Now, I'm not saying that these news organizations need to be so adversarial, but where it's the taxpayers' money, you would think in interest of fairness, in interest of full disclosure, they would at the very least be making some effort to try to portray what's at stake here as fairly as possible, because not everybody agrees. And by the way, voters did not agree. They voted down that levy, and they rejected the idea that, yeah, we need to take on another $500 million in debt. Now, that's $50 million a year over 10 years, but the way it was explained, I mean, the school district tried to make it sound like, it reminded me of a used car salesman. Well, if you don't buy this now, you're going to miss out on saving all the money that you could save by, financing this purchase. And it's gobbledygook, and it's some pretty slick sleight of hand accounting as well. So let's unravel some of the school levy narratives. In particular, I want to give thanks to Nicholas Kleinworth with the Idaho Freedom Foundation. Nick is a wonderful analyst. He's very, very good at what he does. And I love that he does what he does without getting, in the weeds politically. And he's not resorting to name calling. He really goes after the numbers themselves. But he also calls out some very interesting narrative massage that's taking place, as far as trying to sell these levies to the public. He writes, it's time to set the record straight on the myths surrounding the need for more cash, the lack of a clear link between increased funding and better academic outcomes, and the sneaky tactics used to hide the true cost of the levy, and the downright unfair tactic of holding students hostage with threats of cutting classes and staff. This is something that happened in all forms of media regarding this latest vote. Nicholas says everyone agrees that public education has problems: overcrowded, worn-out school buildings, failing test scores, radical left-wing indoctrination. They've pushed the system to a point of crisis. And he says there are many options to consider when looking at how to remedy these problems, ranging from modest reforms such as the Empowering Parents Grant and expanded charter schools to more groundbreaking ideas like education savings accounts that provide parents with genuine school choice. However, the public school establishment and their media allies cling to a single solution: more tax dollars. They're willing to hold our children hostage to secure those funds. Nicholas says, for Idaho's corporate media, government is the solution to every problem. Local reporters almost always default toward favoring increased government oversight while undermining personal freedoms. An article by Sally Krutzig in the Idaho Statesman serves as a prime example. Despite being labeled as an education piece, Krutzig's article reads more like a press release from the West Ada School District. It unquestionably accepts every claim made by the district and Superintendent Derek Bubb, from whom concerns about population growth to busing issues, all while echoing the notion that the proposed $500 million levy, which would raise property taxes by hundreds of dollars per year, is somehow fiscally conservative. Nicholas goes on to say the media narrative is clear. Raising taxes and expanding government-run education is an unabashed good, while alternatives that give power to parents are dangerous. But would our schools do a better job of educating children if they simply had more money? I mean, think back to the legislative session. Now, Nicholas points out education spending continues to rise annually, while test scores remain disappointingly stagnant. Education spending continues to increase year after year, while test scores remain flat. From 2015 to 2019, the state poured an additional $590 million into public schools. That's a 35% budget increase. Only for 55% of students to be proficient in English and 44% proficient in math. So since then, federal COVID funds generously provided another $41 million in budget growth, with the tax of inflation and a ballooning ballooning national debt, rather. Meanwhile, the lackluster performance in Idaho public schools remains stagnant. By the way, if you go to idahofreedom.org, you can actually see in this article, he'll provide you the charts that will show you very clearly what's happening. Yep, the spending is going higher and higher. The performance of the students, their test scores, staying right about the same. Nicholas says even if more money did correlate with achievement, districts are already swimming in cash. Between COVID relief grants, consistent general fund increases from the legislature, and their own rainy day funds, schools should have more than enough for what they need. Districts are trying to pretend that they don't have all this money when they actually do. That's according to IFF Senior Education Policy Analyst Brandon Durst this week. They're trying to trick property taxpayers and voters into thinking times are lean when in fact they're better than ever. Indeed, the school districts are not above using manipulative tactics and skirting the edge of electioneering laws to get their levies across the finish line. So West Ada School District, for instance, produced a slick campaign video for their levy, which was later taken down after members of the legislature raised concerns and asked Ada County Prosecutor Jan Bennett to review the legality of using tax dollars to promote more tax dollars. Isn't that a neat little trick? Let me take your money, my fellow citizen and taxpayer, and use it to lobby for more of your money. Yeah, that doesn't really pass the sniff test. Nicholas writes, earlier this week, the official Parma School District Facebook account posted a long message regarding their upcoming supplemental levy, a message that their official website mirrored. However you vote, they wrote, you should know the facts and know the message you are sending with your vote. Okay, that's a little guilt being played on here. And then the Post goes on to list the positions and the programs that may be cut if the levy were to fail, and also threatens higher fees for athletics and clubs, larger class sizes, more workload for additional staff. You better do what we say, or these are the consequences. Now, Nicholas points out this is another manipulative tactic that many districts use to pass their levies, holding students hostage. Just as the federal government threatens to close Mount Rushmore when the debt ceiling is not raised, districts threaten the elimination of popular programs if the levy fails. Coeur d'Alene schools took a similar approach by creating a website to promote their $25 million supplemental levy. The site features a section titled, "What's at Stake?" listing the employees whose jobs are at risk if the levy doesn't pass. Now, again, these may be legitimate concerns, but again, when you look at the taxpayers, do you see them as just an endless, basically deep pockets that will never, ever run out of cash, an endless source of funding for whatever your wishes and dreams are? And thinking back to what Nicholas pointed out earlier on in the article, with the rainy day funds, with the COVID relief funds, with the huge infusion of cash from the legislature, why do these districts always seem to be stuck in permanent begging mode? It just doesn't make sense. And I think part of the answer has to do with, it's very likely that they're very top heavy in terms of administration. What are those administrators being paid? Is a lot of this going to overhead, or is a lot of this actually making its way to funding things that are happening in the classroom? Before voters commit to hundreds of dollars in annual taxes, Nicholas says they deserve to hear the complete story, meaning they deserve access to transparent information regarding how much money is being spent, how it will be utilized. They deserve to be presented with alternatives to the existing system rather than facing relentless demands to fund a system that has fallen short. Voters deserve accountability for their hard-earned money, not excuses, intimidation, and misleading campaigns. Now, that may seem like kind of a harsh thing to say. Well, Brian, we're talking about schools here. These are students. They need these funds. Oh, I get it. This is the educational good. Well, who will think of the children? But the taxpayers, I want to know who's going to think about them. They're already on the hook for a lot of things. And I'm sorry, media really likes to reinforce the idea that every problem out there requires a government solution. Well, sometimes it doesn't. And I know this is unthinkable for some people, but what if competition in the educational arena were to be introduced? Not the monopoly, not just let's shore up the public school monopoly and make sure that government schools only will always have the upper hand. But what if you actually introduce real competition into schooling of our kids? See, you would actually find schools that come forward and not only deliver on their promises, because frankly, if they don't, parents will take their money and go elsewhere. But you'd also find that they have incentive to deliver on those promises and to do it in the most cost-efficient way possible. That's the beauty of the free market. It finds that wonderful balance point between cost and value, and it meets it. And if it doesn't, guess what? Competition means somebody who can do it better comes along and takes that share of the market. Not something that happens when you're dealing with the state. I do like how Dustin Hurst explained what happened. This is regarding the failure of that bond levy in West Ada. He said, conservatives took over the West Ada school board and then they started acting like liberals. It's like clockwork. Now they advocated for a $500 million property tax hike for nothing. And he says that will hang around their necks forever. Have you noticed this? Have you not seen that there's a real problem within the GOP? And this, I believe this is one of the reasons why there is such an intense effort right now. We've got to somehow find a way to crack open that closed Republican primary in Idaho and make sure that we do ranked choice voting, because they need to make this system easier to access for those people who don't who basically will run on conservatism and then not live up to it, who will talk the talk but won't walk the walk. See, under the closed primary system, it's getting tougher for them to get away with it. They get called out on it, they get voted out, and those who don't adhere to the party platform of fiscal responsibility and less government and more personal responsibility, well, they don't make it to the ballot. So the statists, and they come in all flavors, Democrat, Republican, and otherwise, they really want to crack that system open because they know that they can't fool the voters forever. And in fact, it really appears that the voters are starting to catch on. How do you know that they're catching on? Because the voters and the people that they're supporting and sending to the legislature who will actually behave in a fiscally conservative manner are being labeled as extremists. Not just labeled, but I mean called out constantly. I mean, we have a whole new group of people now, these united leaders that have come together to decry extremism. By the way, I'm wondering when they're going to decry the extremist behavior of a certain professor who apparently attacked one of the trustees at North Idaho College yesterday. They don't seem very intent on naming names, but they sure seem to be pointing just, well, anything that has to do with limited government or freedom, that's extreme, and that's not us, Idaho. Not realizing that actually the position they're advocating is extremely extreme. Let's take another look. This is again from Nicholas Kleinworth with the Idaho Freedom Foundation. Just a couple quick thoughts on, is fiscal conservatism dead in the Idaho GOP? This is a fair question, and it's something that really every GOP voter needs to sort out before you go to the polls next. 3 in 5 Republican lawmakers in the Idaho legislature voted in favor of growing bureaucracies, increasing federal control, and expanding wasteful programs more than half of the time, according to the Idaho Spending Index. With more than half of Republicans boasting voting records that are indistinguishable from those of Democrats, it seems that fiscal conservatism is all but dead in the gem state. New blood in the legislature appears, however, to be rekindling this dormant philosophy of government. That's the part that they're calling extreme. Oh, no, those are the extremists. Now, Nicholas writes, fiscal conservatism used to be a key component of the Republican Party platform. Most conservatives would still say they believe in promoting low taxes, smaller government, personal agency, and less spending. They would add that the free market is the only true path to American prosperity. Social conservatism depends on these principles, as you cannot promote individualism while also funding expanding government intervention. You cannot keep taxes low when agencies continue to grow their budgets. Fiscal and social conservatism go hand in hand. One cannot exist without the other. He says legislators who wish to establish their credentials as conservatives must do more in fiscal policy. Now, this means eliminating ineligibles from government programs like Medicaid, no longer subsidizing abortion, cutting federal strings. These are pivotal for advancing conservative policymaking. Continuing to fund these bad policies subverts conservative principles and thwarts the success of working Americans. And he points out, constituents realize this. The dramatic shift in the fiscal policy of the Idaho Senate is a key indicator that Idahoans are finished with the Washington, D.C. style rampant spending and the social implications that come with it. Now, the bigger question is, are there enough people who are finally picking up on this and putting their foot down and saying, I won't support a candidate who can't toe the line on fiscal conservatism as well as social conservatism, but, instead just wants to try to talk the talk? Now, I won't have time in today's episode, but later this week on Friday, I'm going to spend some time examining how our libraries have also become a focal point of cultural battles. And Brian Allman, writing for his own Gem State Substack, as well as writing for the Idaho Freedom Foundation, has done a marvelous job of documenting some of the different stories about how the library, which used to be a place of, this is where we transmit civilization, where we transmit culture to the up-and-coming generations. Now it's become kind of a point of activism. And nowhere is that more apparent, and no more will you see more of the kind of shifty-eyed tap dancing done by politicians than, we can't really, restrict the kind of material that we make available to kids in the library. Julie Yamamoto, the representative who, insisted, I'm doing the patriotic thing by making sure that kids have access to all of this information, isn't taking into account that, what these kids are being given access to is really, it's not mainstream. It's not even decent. They're being taught how to perform oral sex, how to engage in anal sex. I mean, this is for kids. Why would you want to direct that kind of message to kids? I know that, Twitter handles like the secret society of friends of the library, they try to portray it as, well, this is just all about just giving the kids good information. But it's not. It's about trying to It's about trying to break down barriers, particularly the barriers that parents may have put up, teaching their kids right and wrong, appropriate and inappropriate, and getting the kids to awaken their latent queerness so that they can embrace, whatever is being spoon-fed to them by LGBTQ plus activists. And it's sad because the library should be a place that people willingly would want to take their kids. It should be a place where kids should be set free to explore and to learn about the world. But somebody's always got to come in and muddy the water, and in this case, by bringing in, sexually deviant material that is not just, it's not just smutty stuff that adults, Lady Chatterley's Lover, if you knew where to find it, you could check it out of the library. This is aimed at kids. It's drawn like cartoons, but it's directly aimed at kids, and it's designed to, let's just use the word, groom them into exploring things that they're not ready to explore. They're not old enough or mature enough or responsible enough to have that kind of information laid on them. Now you may think that, well, I'm really talking down the kids by treating them like that, but it's very telling that that the children have become the focus of so much of the darkness that is trying to assert itself as the dominant dynamic in our society today. There's always been darkness in the world. I don't think I've ever seen a time, though, where it's been more bold or more proud, if I could borrow a word. It's expressed more pride at being there. And now it feels well accepted enough, or at least that it has enough cover from political America and corporate America. And basically, so many of the institutions have embraced it. Yeah, they portray it as we're all victims here. Nobody loves us. But, when you've got the major institutions of society shilling for you and enforcing your viewpoint, you're not the victim. You're not the resistance. You're actually receiving preferential treatment, and your agenda is being pushed on kids now. And it is appropriate for responsible adults, that would be you and me, to step up and say, nope. So we'll explore that in some detail in the next edition of Nowhere to Hide. In the meantime, keep your hands on your pocketbook. There's no expense that we can spare as long as it's your money. Money is no object for the people who think they know what's best. Stay in touch with your elected representatives. I would highly recommend take the time to unplug from mainstream media so much as possible. And if you're looking for good, solid analysis, and I mean credible analysis, where they'll actually show you, here's where we get these numbers, here's where we came to this conclusion, consider going to idahofreedom.org. They have some wonderful analysts whose job it is to break these issues down into things that you and I can understand and see how it impacts us, not just in terms of dollars and cents, although that's important, but also how it impacts us politically, how it impacts our freedoms, and looking toward the future, how it will impact our children and even their children. That sound like a tall order? That sound like more than you want to take on? That's too bad. If you're serious about maintaining freedom and handing that torch still burning brightly to the next generation, we've got some heavy lifting to do. So let's get after it. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.